Hello and welcome to One on One. I'm Vernon Ramasar, and my guest today, about 2 decades ago, I remember I had the opportunity to interview him in his then capacity as a Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, and I remember my program director at the time saying, this is a big deal, you got a Deputy Governor of the Central Bank. And I have to say, I still think of it as a big deal today because he's such an expert on this country and economics. Dr. Terrence Farrell, welcome back to welcome to this program.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vernon.
Well, you've published a book now, and it's a book, so many people feel it's okay to write a book with no sort of background or knowledge of the subject, that anybody can write a book nowadays. You come to this analysis of our society, and you call it the underachieving society.
Yes.
You worked at the Central Bank through the latter part of the 80s, into the
into
early 90s, as well as
95,
Deputy Governor.
Mm-hmm.
You've been an economist your whole life, I guess, with your
yes.
PhD in 1979.
Yes.
You've been analyzing this country and how we've operated for a long time. Why did you feel it necessary to bring this book out now? And it must obviously be something that bugs the heck out of you to call us the underachieving society.
Yes. I didn't come to the title easily, and I think it's a title which probably still disturbs people and probably will disturb a lot of people, I think, because it really is a bit of a, if you like, a bit of a slap in the face. But I came to it because I had actually done my master's dissertation many years ago on our economic planning. So I looked at the first 3 plans up to 1973. That was my master's dissertation. And then I was involved in 2003 to 5 with the Vision 2020 task force. So I had sort of come back to economics and come back to looking at
2020.
Precisely. So I actually had decided to redo my master's dissertation and to fix it up. And then I thought that maybe I should bridge the 2 things. I should bridge the early, what I call planning years, with what happened in the 2000s up to 2008. And as I worked on it, the theme came out, and that is that, quite frankly, we have an underachieving society. That we have a society which, given the resources that we have been blessed or cursed with, and it is really more like a curse, that when you look at how we have performed relative to other countries, and I think for our own selves, what you see is underperformance. And it really is a very disturbing conclusion. I mean, it's a book written in part for economists because it tells the history of what has happened here between 1950s and now. So I think from that point of view, hopefully it will be a very useful reference, I think, for people who are looking at the economic history of the place and so on. But I think the underlying theme which comes out of it, and the last 2 chapters do that, is where I step back and I compare Trinidad and Tobago's performance in a number of dimensions with some other countries. I looked at countries like Norway and Barbados and Singapore, and compared in terms of GDP, in terms of inflation performance, in terms of corruption, a number of indicators.
Human development, of
Human development, health, delivery, infant mortality. When you look at those indicators and you look at where we are relative to those countries, it is really quite depressing.
That brings up the next question.
Yes.
You must have asked yourself, having been part of the process, at least through the
Yes.
Central Bank for a while,
Yes.
why? We started off with all great ideas, as many countries do.
Yes.
We had, under Dr. Williams, we
Yes.
had these long-term economic plans
Yes.
for development.
Right.
We don't really see those kind of 5-year plans anymore, or
Correct.
long-term plans. But in terms of what we were aiming at and where we fell short, it's quite
Well, I try
a disconnect.
I try to answer that in the book because I think that there are reasons why we are where we are. One of them, you quite rightly said, for example, you said we do not do any planning anymore. We stopped that. Eric Williams is the one who stopped it. In the 1970s, he very famously said that planning has lost its mystique, and he simply stopped. So the third 5-year plan was the last plan that was done by the PNM government. Then it was revived by the NAR government in the 1980s. In between there, you had the DEMAS task force, imperative of adjustment, which really wasn't a development plan as such. It was trying to grapple with the problems of falling oil prices and so on. The NAR published, well, they had a plan, a draft plan, and it was never implemented. And then when the PNM came back into power in the 1990s, they just simply never bothered with doing any plan until Vision 2020. And Vision 2020 is interesting because although it was a planning exercise in a way, the government was doing that, and at the same time, it was doing something completely different. It was doing off on a frolic of its own with UDCOT and all kinds of things happening while this Vision 2020 plan was being done, and it was simply ignored, and quite frankly, it was ignored by the PNM administration. So that one of the things that I point out in the book actually is that we have not had continuity of policy. If you look at Singapore, Singapore has had an economic development board consistently in place since the 1950s. They have never changed. Now you can say the government of Singapore doesn't change, but they've never changed. If you look at India, India is now on its 11th or 12th five-year plan. They started doing five-year plans in the 1940s, 1950s, and they have consistently done that, although India has moved from being this kind of socialist kind of society into societies that have very much embraced capitalism and so on and so forth, but they have continued doing their plans. What we have done is that we seem to get tired of things. We try something, we stop it, we change, and then we don't like that, and we change it back again. So the history has been a history of discontinuity. Every administration which comes into power simply jettisons what the previous government has done, and they start over.
And even as you mentioned, even governments that have come up with the plan will often sacrifice the plan to political expediency.
Precisely, yes.
So we're kind of damned if we do and damned if we don't.
We are really not performing well. Our politicians are not, I would have to say quite frankly, our elite, and I'm not just simply identifying the politicians, because our politicians are part of our elite. The elite in our society has not served us particularly well. And I say that both in terms of the professional elite, as well as our politicians and our other leadership, even our business leadership. When I talk about the business community, for example, I recall that when I first came into or near to the public sector in the central bank, there were people like Tommy Gatliff and Sidney Knox and so on who had embraced, took on certain issues, and they did battle with people like Frank Rampersad, for example, on tax reform and so on. And then when you look at the business community that we have today, what you see is that the business community has retreated. They no longer, quite frankly, speak out about crime and those types of things and so on, but people don't talk about business issues. People don't talk about, there's no articulation about what the country needs to do from the point of view of the business community. I find that is quite deficient. So I'm saying really our elite, business, political, professional elite has quite frankly not served as well.
And you mentioned earlier Barbados, which is of course a very near neighbor, which was not as blessed or cursed, as you say, as we are with energy wealth, but which has managed in terms of human development to have done remarkably well.
Remarkably well. They have no oil, they have no gas, or very little of any of those things. They have tourism. But Barbados...
Which is notoriously a fickle economic pillar.
Precisely, yes. In fact, petrostrates, when you look at petrostrates have done particularly badly compared to other states. Singapore has no natural resources whatsoever. But when you look at where their GDP is compared to where ours is, you scratch your head and you say, well, what has been going on here? Why is it that we have squandered what we have in the way that we have? So I point out the discontinuity policy. There's also the issue of culture. And I think one of the things in terms of trying to understand why we do things or we don't do things, I think there has to be a cultural explanation for it. And the section of the book on chapter 18 is entitled "We Like It So," meaning that I think that if you have a people who want to accumulate wealth and income for themselves and for their families, and a people who think intergenerationally, so that I'm not just doing what I'm doing for myself today, but I'm also thinking about my children, about my children's children. That kind of society is a society where people work hard and they accumulate and you get growth and you get development. In our society, I think, unfortunately, and I think this is particularly true of the Afro-Trinidadian segment of the population, and I'll talk about ethnicity in a minute, it is particularly true that you do not have that powerful impulse for accumulation and for intergenerational thinking and accumulation. And that compromises the country's ability to grow, because people are only focused on earning an income to spend it today or tomorrow, not thinking about accumulation and saving and investment for themselves and for the children, for the children's run.
Well, if I might just keep on with the ethnic component there, if we look then at the other example, if we're going to use the generalization which one hates to use, let's look at the East Indian side of the Trinidad and Tobago equation, where there has been traditionally a sense of intergenerational looking ahead and planning for the future.
Right.
That's fully half of the population. It still hasn't translated into any national, even halfway policy.
No, it hasn't. And I think that there may be reasons for that in terms of how the East Indian community has accumulated, because a lot of East Indian communities' accumulation has centered, at least historically, around land. Now, when we're talking economics here, the value proposition that you have as a country, which you might have had a century ago, which was based on land, in the 21st century, it is really not important. It's not that important. And so therefore, you have to shift the basis now on which you are pursuing your economic activity to one based on knowledge, the accumulation of knowledge, and so on. And so therefore, what you see with the Eastern community is that over the course of the last couple of decades, that you see progressively East Indians moving more and more into knowledge accumulation through professionalization and so on and so forth, and leaving issues about land and so on behind. And
well,
so therefore,
they're not just also leaving issues of land behind, but I think perhaps culturally, and I think maybe there's some historical basis, I can't be sure I'm correct, but there's been a tendency to view Trinidad as a transition to another
somewhere
geographical transition, a stepping stone, if you will, to doing well and moving somewhere else.
Precisely, and that is why Lloyd Best used to call us a transient society, because everybody in society is thinking about going somewhere else. And nobody sees this place as their own and says, I'm going to take ownership for it. It is reflected in how we simply deal with the environment. We litter the environment willy-nilly. We drive on the roads as though we really don't care. It doesn't matter to us. And that psychology, that transient society psychology, I think is still very much with us. People are on the way to somewhere else, and they don't feel as though they want to take ownership for the place. Now, and I come back to the point about your elite, because in any society, the elite, and elite may be a strong, people don't like the word elite. But all societies have elites, including societies like the United States and so on, have elites. And the elites really are the people in your society who set the tone. They are the ones who set the moral tone for the society, the values. And what the elite in your society does is that it disciplines itself and it disciplines the rest of the society to ensure that that moral tone is maintained and those values are upheld. So the United States, for example, in the United States, the elite United States, if you cross the line, and it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're the president of the United States, Clinton was impeached, whether you're the governor of Illinois, Rod Blagojevich, who is now in jail because he tried to sell President Obama's Senate seat, the Americans do not compromise in terms of questions about values among the elite. The elite are the repository of those values. In our society, our elite, sad to say, does not do that. So people here get away with anything. We act with impunity. We are undisciplined in terms of how we deal with issues. And nobody is held accountable for their omissions and their commissions. And so therefore the society is just ambling around, blessed, cursed, if you like, by oil revenues and gas revenues. And I think as we look down the horizon, that fete, to use George Chambers' term, that fete is about to come to an end.
The idea of just taking what you can and then moving ahead and hoping. I don't want to drag you into any political argument, but if we look at, in terms of the moral argument you mentioned there, if we look at Mr. Warner and his recent experience, not judging guilt or not guilt, the fact that there were things hanging over Mr. Warner's head, and yet you had a large segment of his constituency certainly that said, well, it doesn't matter because we got this and the road was paved. Is that to some extent emblematic of what you're talking about?
Precisely. It is precisely. And you see, and this is where setting that tone in the society is critically important. And therefore, that is where the elite, when I say the religious elite, the business elite, the political elite, the professional elite, and so on, are the ones who are going to be saying, see, that is not acceptable, and we are going to deal with that. And they set the tone, and quite frankly, the rest of the population will follow, because people look to the elite, they look to their leaders for setting that tone. And unfortunately, our leadership is not setting that tone in our society. So to come to that, the question about culture in terms of whether or not culturally as a people we are not into accumulation and to the generation of wealth and so on, I think has been a problem for the society. You know, we also as a society, I think, have several myths about ourselves. We keep saying how we are so creative and we are so innovative, and then we point to Carnival and we point to all the
God is a
queens
Trini.
that we have, and God is a Trini, and the cricket team, and Keyshawn Walcott, and so on. But the truth of the matter is that we seem to think as though we are alone in the world and that other countries don't have people who are talented and innovative and so on, number one. And secondly, we are unable, unfortunately, to translate that creativity and that talent and so on into the generation of economic wealth. These things happen. We have a successful football team that goes to the World Cup, smallest country in the world to ever go to the World Cup and so on. But so what? Mm-hmm. How do we translate that into economic wealth? How do we translate Carnival, which we keep touting as being the greatest show on earth and so on, into something that becomes a powerful economic vehicle to generate wealth and employment for our citizens? We haven't been able to do that. So we have these myths about ourselves.
But we like smoke and mirrors, don't
we?
We
do.
I mean, the fact we will celebrate, we won Miss Universe, as if that would translate into anything,
yes,
anywhere of any substance whatsoever.
Right. Yes.
But we sort of will revel in that and party about that.
Precisely, yes.
And at the end of the day, nothing comes of it.
Nothing comes of it, yes, except that they maybe induce you to hold Miss Universe, Mr. Trump.
And we won't talk about that expenditure at the time. But I have to ask,
yes,
we only have about 10 minutes, and there's so many things. I'll definitely have to have you back on again, if you will. This is the book, by the way, The Underachieving Society. In terms of you writing it, as we speak here, as always, you aren't just speaking as an economist. You're an economist.
Yes.
But there are elements of anthropology, psychology, sociology,
yes,
everything comes into play. And that really is how you have to look at a nation, isn't it?
Yes, and I would say a good economist is a good social scientist. A good economist is somebody who looks not only at the sort of the economic variables, but also understands the political, the social, and so on, understands how to put that together. I mean, economists are sort of very strong quantitative types. We like numbers. You see lots of numbers inside of here, and you see graphs and so on.
Well, I like numbers. That's a good thing.
Because that is really our stock in trade. But we really need to put that into the social context, the political context, in order to make it meaningful. And I think I've tried to do that with this.
Because you really can't do predictive models unless you can predict to some extent human behavior.
Precisely.
And that is
Yes.
contingent on a number of factors that come to play, aren't they?
Precisely.
So what do you hope to achieve by this book, other than holding up a mirror to us and getting people annoyed? Which undoubtedly will happen in some
I hope people don't get annoyed. I hope when the mirror is held up, people will say, look, I don't like what I see in the mirror, and that we need to change. And so I end the book by saying what I think we need to do. I think it would have been really, very, very unfair if I just simply said, this is how you are.
The ship is sinking.
But, but no, I try to say this is what we need to do. The problem with my prescriptions, however, is that to a large extent they involve a really fundamental cultural, psychological change on the part of our people.
And nothing is harder to accomplish.
And nothing is harder to accomplish than that. And again, I come back to the elite, I come back to the leadership in society. It has to start there.
Do you suspect, Dr. Farrell, I know you often say just call you Terrence or whatever, but
yes,
I'll still insist on calling you Dr. Farrell for the rest of my days,
yes,
that if oil and gas, heaven forbid, just dried up tomorrow and we were forced to confront the ugly reality
yes,
of the actual economy that we have operating, yes, that our psychology would change?
It would have to last for a period of time, because one thing that I say here is that if you there's a paragraph in the book which when Norman Gervin was doing the reading for me, and he made very, very helpful comments on it and so on, and he was reading and he said this paragraph is what the book is all about. And the paragraph really is saying that what we do is that when the thing collapses, what Lloyd Bess used to call the period of gall and wormwood, we go from the golden age to the period of gall and wormwood, we don't really transform the place. We don't change our psychology. What we do is that we wait, because we are waiting for the thing to turn around and for the effect to start back again. We just wait.
Which is the history of Trinidad and Tobago
Which
in
is
the
the
modern
history.
era, which is boom and bust.
Precise.
And those of us who've been unfortunate to have lived long enough will see the same patterns happening over and over again. And we don't learn any lessons, do we?
We haven't learned any lessons.
And the politicians don't seem to learn lessons.
And the politicians come out today and they say, they talk as if they're discovering things for the first time. And when you read the book, you realize that we said the same words 50 years ago. Different politicians, saying the same words: diversification, transformation, innovation, all the things.
And we said it in the 80s before.
And we said it in the 80s and the 90s, and we may be saying it for the next decade. We really need, as a society, to make some fundamental changes in our thinking.
How come we, as a people, will buy into political speak so readily and so willingly and not buy into economic speak? If you look at, for example, the previous administration was, perhaps with reason, perhaps without, accused of squandermania by many members of the current administration, which is currently running a bigger deficit than this country has ever seen. I mean, there's a sort of a disconnect there, isn't there?
We have lost our professional advisors. Eric Williams actually started it. Eric Williams is one, unfortunately, who was responsible for that because he cut off some of the public servants at their knees, people like Scotty Lois and Eugenia Moore and so on in those days. And what you have had over the 25 years since that time is a consistent and steady decline in the public service, both in terms of the quality of the people who are in the public service today and in terms of their ability to advise the politicians. When I came into or near to the public sector in the central bank in the 1980s, public servants and we in the central bank spoke publicly. We would go out and we would talk and we would give speeches and so on. Today, you almost never see that happening. The public servants, the technocrats have been suppressed, and the politicians have stepped forward, and they are articulating on issues about, quite frankly, which they know nothing. They come into a ministry, they know nothing about the ministry, they do not take the advice, and they go out and they speak and they pontificate and nothing happens.
Isn't it also because civil servants will be looking at a long-term picture and looking over time, as opposed to politicians are looking at a certain expediency over between now and the end of the next election cycle,
and tomorrow or next week, quite frankly,
or whatever gets votes immediately.
Whatever. Yes, it's all about expediency, and you can't develop a society and a country in that way. You can't do it, and so therefore, when we talk about discipline, our politicians who become ministers of government also need to be disciplined in that way. They need to recognize what they don't know, what my brother calls two-story ignorance, that people don't know what they don't know. That you need to understand that you are afflicted with that. You need to defer to the technocrats who know. You need to improve the quality of the technocrats in our society and then make sure that they're giving you excellent advice. Look, take an example, the highway. $7.2 billion. So the announcement effect about spending billions of dollars is what is attractive there. But now you've reached an impasse in a situation, and what has transpired? That no economic analysis was done of the highway. None was done of the highway. That's what the James Armstrong report has said.
$7.2 billion.
7.2. So we spend the money, and there is no analysis. We built buildings around Port of Spain during the PNM administration between 2002 and 2008, no economic analysis. We built all these houses and so on, no economic analysis. So where are the economists, where are the advisors, where are the people who are guiding policy and shaping policy in the way that Dimas and Scotty Lewis and Eugenia Moore and Frank Rampersad and those people did back in the 1970s and the 1980s, and they're gone.
So traditionally we've had a culture in this country of governments will do things, I guess the local expression is VAPs.
Yes.
They just catch themselves and think, well, that seems like a good idea, let's do that, and let's just spend lots of money on that, with no feasibility study, no economic study, nothing to back it up. Before we run out of time, and we probably have a little bit left, but I just want to tell people once again, the book is The Underachieving Society. It's launching on Thursday.
It's launching on Thursday, and it should be available at Book Specialists, which is on Richmond Street.
Richmond Street?
Yeah, Richmond Street.
That's the only place to get it? Because I mean, you have a line outside the door.
For the time, or you can order it online actually. You can order it if you want to go on Amazon, or you want to go to the UE Press book website. And you can order it, and it gets delivered to you in about 3 weeks.
Okay, so we've got that out of the way. So
yes,
you can continue
Google it, and you just...
few valuable moments that we have.
Yes.
So in terms of changing the culture, aren't we sort of damned to the extent that we have this continuing scenario of underachieving.
Yes.
If somebody is, and we have very smart people in this country, I mean, I'm sitting next to one right now, but if somebody is like you, you're still here, but many others who have great potential and want to realize their potential, why would you want to be in a mediocre or underachieving society? The tendency then would be to
Well, you won't.
migrate, wouldn't it?
Precisely.
So we end up losing those people who
Precisely.
could raise us.
Precisely, yes. And so think about it. When we talked about a transient society a little while ago, check, my children are not here. They are abroad. One is in New York, the other one is in London. They've done very well. They've been to Cambridge and MIT and Harvard, and so they've done very well. They're not here. If you check out the children of the elite, they're not here. The second point that I would make is that one or two people can't make a difference. You need to have a critical mass of professional people to make a difference. So that one individual, if you say myself, can't make a difference. You need to have a critical mass of people. In the 1960s and 1970s, we in fact had a critical mass of top-notch technocrats in the country. Top-notch. Dimas, Barsotti, Rampersad, Eugenio Moore. Top-notch, Cambridge educated, Oxford educated, and so on. And that has dissipated, it has gone, and we are where we are.
Well, that's a very cheery note to end the program on, Dr. Farrell. I'm hoping after the launch you'll be able to come back again, because I think we've only just scratched the surface of your views.
I would love to come back.
I would be extremely honored to have you back on again.
Indeed.
Dr. Terrence Farrell, a pleasure having you on the program.
Take care.
Thank you so much for being here.
Take care.
You've been watching One on One. Join us again tomorrow for another edition.